Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I'm going to show you how to make this sound. I'll tell you why I let it play twice and a half there, so I can admit. This actually isn't the track I'm working on. I made this drum loop so I could have a better idea of the rhythm while I was making this because the metronome wasn't cutting it, and I needed to have a more realistic kind of backdrop to feel it. Anyway, this bass is based on some stuff that I thought about while I went to Asteria Music Festival in South Florida. I did some workshops there for the artists that performed. I also hung out with the artists that performed, and honestly, I haven't hung out with that many artists before. I came back with some ideas. In this case, this guy is like the main kind of experiment here is I actually wanted to use the ModX speed mapping in some way that's actually useful. On top of that, I'm also doing a kind of a more rhythmy than usual dubstep sound for myself because that's what was playing a lot there. And boy, did it sound good. Whew. Now, most of that stuff, like the entire genre of rhythm, is mostly done, with Serum. And the kind of whippiness is mostly done with that reverb filter or the all passes or the chromes or whatever. And we're doing this from kind of both ends here because I'm doing it with delay modulation. At least a little bit. It's really not as directly harsh as the Serum filtered versions are. I'm doing it like that, and then I'm also really screwing with the pitch of the main actuator here in a lot of ways. I'm gonna break this down. Don't worry. I'm automating the prism. I think I'm also automating the pitch directly. Like I'm automating so many things. I'm automating the units in pitch thickness, which is also pitch. When you move that around, you're moving pitch around, so that helps. I altered the phases. I altered the local EQ a lot. In particular, I took the sub out of this one because the sub is replaced completely, but as a single sine wave. Loading like an unfundamental sound into distortion is pretty great because that lower harmonic doesn't like do that lower harmonic thing to the higher harmonics, but the couple of first two harmonics do, and it's a different texture. Yeah, what else am I doing? That's pitchy. That's kind of it, isn't it? Well, like I altered the pitch of the prism, but like super light. The idea was that originally I was gonna try and do this all with the phaser with the harmonic mode, but it actually just sounded better in one of these flat modes. And I just picked a shape, and it was kind of neat. Me going this far into using the phaser right now is actually directly the result of me hanging out with one particular producer. His name is Jay Kuch, Jkuch. Go look up his stuff. He uses Harmor. Anyway, on this side I have noise, so let's actually look at the layers here. Try and parse this business. So this looks a little dumb, but in reality, it's this guy is the main dude and a noise part. This guy is the sub, and this guy is like a kind of higher texture, almost completely noise, but mostly actually some kind of texture. Like observe. I actually originally tried doing this in the sub guy, but then I realized I wanted to put him into the distortion, and I want the sub to do that. So what's happening with this dude, he's having his pitch, I think just enveloped, so it's like doo-doo-doo, kind of laser thing going on there. But the main deal is doing this is that I have the phaser on the frequency mode. And in frequency mode, instead of altering the volume of the parameter of the oscillator harmonic, it alters its pitch. So whatever it was going to move around, make those phasery holes, it just makes the pitch change, and it's usually pretty destructive. In this case, it's extra destructive because this is the shape I put in. And the reason that you see how the speed knob is all the way up, this is basically me doing additive FM, because this shape is essentially, it's basically like as if this were like the one whole shape, like over here. Like if I like this is happening one time per amount of speed, right? And then if I double it, then now it's happening twice. And now it's twice as fast. If it's the same shape, it's now twice as fast. So that's the point of this guy here. And this is like a pretty special shape. It's not exactly sine waves or whatnot. And of course, I'm automating it. It's sort of like the top end of the automation is the highest frequency bit, and that's where it gets cleanest, and the rest of it is just noise. Another thing that I learned by directly watching a bunch of rhythm producers make rhythm is that a lot of these things don't survive total modulation lengths, which is why it's really good to just modulate with volume, so that like you've got like the top half of it, and then as it gets back down to a lower, usually more just messed up bit, it just vanishes. And we're layering this with extra stuff so to kind of replace it with, so that it doesn't feel like it's unbalanced. Yeah. So this guy, this up here, this is the random phase option. So there's running and then there's spectral, and this side just means that every harmonic is going to start on a different phase, independent from each other. I also had this frequency up to 14, and that's just like I wanted it higher. And I noted that like it's hard to keep a note in here, and it doesn't really matter if it's like even octaves, just as long as it's in a whole number. It'll still be like relatively harmonic, or it'll sound kind of evil, which sometimes is nice. I am distorting the crap out of it. I'm keeping the filter on there because I am the highest of the high frequencies is being taken care of by the dude in the original guy. I have him on uniform mode. All this is just very arbitrary. Like with this particular sound being so particularly noisy. Oh boy, I'm also doing Prism and I think I'm automating it. Yeah. With this being particularly noisy, is that a lot of the stuff I didn't have the chance, like wasn't really going to destroy it. A lot of more harmonically rigid sounds, like I had to be light touch about it because anything I could do could potentially ruin like what's cool about it. But this being something noisy and ridiculous, like the damage is only going to be good. And if it's not, then it just won't do it again. But it happens a lot less that a parameter could be so destructive that like this kind of a thing could be broken by it. So everything in here, like, with the exception of this like FM phaser stuff, is completely arbitrary. I think I actually tried to do something weird, and no, that was the other guy, I think. Yeah. So the sub guy is actually having his pitch modulated. Another fun thing I learned from what was basically a rhythm camp for me. I usually like to keep it, clean subs and whatnot. But, of course, obviously the sub is moving. I honestly can't believe I never thought of that, like, for this kind of thing. But basically, I'm just automating a mod X mod, going on there. And the volume is going with it, too. And this kind of double curve thing, like, you come in here, single line is usually the one that you normally have. But double curve lets you do this. And this makes it, so that the top half is more represented than the lower half for longer. And also that when it's up there, it doesn't move so much. And that kind of creates a tighter, like, wob when you wob it around. Really important is that the ramping value be something, like, helpful for you. What I mean by that is watch what happens when I bring it all the way down. So there's like too hard, too soft, and a middle ground. And you want to find where your middle ground is. That's just basically a declicking, but it's spectral so that the speed is different per harmonic based on how fast the pitch is and how fast the wavelength is and that kind of thing. And it's a sub. It's going into the Maximus. And like what was neat about how hard the cuts were within Harmor, even with distortion, because I EQ'd it out later, is that I could bring the low band like pretty close to where the sub was and just leave the sub alone. And I'm not compressing the low end at all because of how like completely cleanly separated it is from the rest of the stuff. Speaking of the rest of the stuff. And here's another J. Kutch idea. Putting drum samples and stuff into the convolver. I took that a step further and I put a pitch sample I put a vocal, this is lower web hey there. Hey. And I cut it up and reversed it and then pitched it down an octave. I actually didn't need to do that last part because I could have used this. That's literally what this does. So this sample just is that. And I had this other guy, and this guy's sample is just, which is one of the Foley samples, from in here. MA spray, and I cut it up and moved it around too, and like it's you can do that in here. So if you don't have the keyboard input on, you can still use like the mouse commands to do just like cut, delete, and edit and whatever. And like that's sort of what I do when I want to like, because if you think about it, convolver is like it's shaping your reverb and or just the post of it to this audio file. And if the audio file is too long, then it's gonna be like basically like as if this were your envelope. So then. What am I doing? I'm just deleting this to show you can, yeah. And then just for fun, Alt F, if you have the keyboard on, is the auto fade command, and then you can see it fade in, fade out, and then that'll make it so that if you make a cut, that you can make sure that it's actually at the end over there if you need to. You might notice I didn't do that for this. Actually, I did do that. Doop. But like for something shows it's like sharp and short like this, you don't always need to do that. And in fact, sometimes the shortcut can sound kind of cool if it's the right length to be rhythmic. Wave shaper, just kind of saturation, like soft clipper almost, not very. Actually, this is exactly what the soft clipper looks like. Isn't that funny? I'm automating the pre-gain going on over here. I think this guy's doing all sorts of duty. Number one here is modulating the X parameter of all the harmors, and then all the harmors getting, their internal modulation. Number two is the delay amount, and number three is the two convolvers amount. And number four, what's number four doing? Oh, number four is something. No, that's that guy. What's number three? Number three might be. What's number three doing? Oh, number three is doing the pregame. Derp. Yeah, so that's the amount level there. And then number four is this dude's. Neat. I was about to think I was controlling a parameter in here with the envelope controller when I realized, no, I'm actually doing that with the internal mod X here. Derp. In UE. So the two halves of this guy. Let's talk about that. There's a delay I mentioned I modulated. I was modulating it. I haven't high passed it or anything special like that. This is just kind of on. That's a pretty harsh EQ, and like a lot of this like real specific balance was achieved like listening to all three of them together and making like really small calls on like what did or not like really belong. And it's arbitrary, my taste kind of thing. But that's what I had to do to get it this far. But yeah, the halves. So first half and second half. Yeah, did you know that if you tried hard enough, you can make noise in Harmor? Well, you do that by turning on the octave mode of the pitch distribution. This is to show you what this does to a regular Harmor. Because normally, you have a note. And then, so what it basically does is that it switches the harmonics playing to be not like based on the octave like note distribution, but instead being individual hertz distribution. And that doesn't sound like a note. It's just a bunch of harmonics, and it has all sorts of interesting stuff it does, and phase cancellation and weirdness. And I applied all the stuff to it in this guy. I have Prism on, and I'm automating that. It's pitched, so like it does move around up and down like a note would, but then I'm also automating it like with a envelope here. You can kind of see it diving when the note plays longer. Well, actually, that was a slide note, but they all kind of dive. And then I turned the pluck on, and I turned on the blur, and this shape. Acting like real specific timed release. Really, that's what this is. This is like a changing release time per harmonic situation. I am doing the phaser thing, but this is in harmonic mode, and like this is beyond arbitrary because this entire thing is a mess, and it's supposed to be a mess. This is like the squeezy stuff that comes in on top of the things, and like I really don't use noise all that often. I don't use like unharmonic stuff to layer into a thing to give it texture, but you can do that, if that's a plan you have. And that's something else I learned. Ending up in watching all this stuff is just how much like texture matters. Like I try to get a lot out of just like rigid harmonic structure, but like there's always so much. So I have randomness on the phase mapping also, just to make sure that like every single note's a bit different. What am I doing with that in there? Nope, that's pretty all regular. I got some amount of randomness on, but like not so much. If I could even tell the difference between the two right now. And the main guy is where a lot of super fun stuff is happening. Now talk about this guy we're going to do without the effects. Like a lot of that stuff I did like with the effects on to like kind of hear what was happening, which is why I left it there, because you were listening to what I was hearing when I was making the decisions. But this guy actually got pretty far on by itself before I started doing stuff to it. So Mod X speed mapping. What the heck is that? Well, this instead of being mod X position, it's how fast are you moving the mod X. So like if you move it like this fast, that's X, and if I moved it twice as fast, that'd be twice X, and that'd be your value of whatever's coming out of here. And you see this kind of weirdness going on, and that's because what I sort of assumed would happen, because I don't really use this very often, is that like if I did like a pretty solid line, that it would be a pretty even thing. But it takes a second to kind of catch up to what its speed is. So while I didn't get to use it for like a really, really kind of clean effect I had planned, what I did get to use it for was kind of interesting control over modulation change. Right now, the main effect it links to is unison phase for the thing, and like even though it moves it moves around as much as your automation does. Phase is a thing that doesn't change in real time up through unison, so that means that it only changes when the notes starts or not, and that's important. Am I doing anything with that in here? I know I'm doing speed mapping. Oh yeah, and the width, I think, yes. So I'm doing on the width too. The width of the phaser here. I'm also automating the width of the phaser and the phaser's offset inside these guys here. This is the phaser width, the phaser offset, and like that's where like a lot of the really big changes in tone come from. And that's just, I wouldn't say random. There's definitely a rhythm to this, and I kind of like sculpted it based on just kind of hearing what the results were, but they were vast. Like all the crap you can get out of it is a lot. So it would have been a shame if I just kept it on one position and kept that like that was the sound. Also, I'm doing a custom filter shape, which is kind of like a band pass that's followed by like a low pass, like together it kind of forms like a notch thing. Am I messing with the width? No, I didn't do any of that. But this is being automated by ModX, and like that's underneath all of this. It's kind of creating the bed upon which the phaser does all this stuff to it. And then I'm also using unison because I was gonna do some craziness with harmonic mapping on the phaser, but this is mostly just I wanted to kind of break it because I was using uniform, right? And I talk a lot about how hertz works, right? Where you're doing like over here, it's distributed pitch change by hertz value across the whole spectrum. And if you think about that, that means that relative to notes, that means it goes less, it's less pitch up above it over time. And that's just what I did here. And it sounded good, so I didn't really, poke too further with it. I also kept the voice count low because it tends to lose itself in a lot of voices. Yeah, so also noting that I have the phase on the downside here, that does mean that this graph is the opposite. Like up here means that it's going to go like down this way, and then down up through here means it's going to kind of poke up. Of course, it's not moving the knob, so we can't see what it's doing, but that's kind of the result it would have. The difference between these two positions, this one is equal spread, this one's running. Right, jump ahead is what I called it. And the difference between the two is that if you were to put it in the 0 position and let it play, you hear how it has a progression of phase cancellation. This is, you can hear how that progression kind of moves over time. This, like all this way down, is as if you're starting further down how much that phase cancellation began from 0 phase. And then this direction is, it just spreads the phase. It just makes them evenly spread. And like, there's no guarantee at all that this is an even spread when you come up here, especially if you screw with the unison pitch and things, because that means that if you let it run, it gets more and more out of like harmonic phase as well as phase with itself. And that means that if you have to start for that way, it won't be evenly spread. But this makes it evenly spread, and it is a different sound. As you can see, even though like I just went back to vaguely the right position, it was still kind of different, being not exactly the same position. That's how touchy this stuff is. So I'm also automating the prism, and the prism is like light touch. And when you do something like this, that's like not really moving very far. And like I'm using on the multiplier mode, so this is like really not moving very far, because if it was, it would wreck it. Let's get rid of this. That. That's what the prism modulation sounds like with it. This is what it sounds like with just that filter by itself. And now here it is with the prism. Now here it is with the unison. Now here it is with the phaser. And this is also moving around too. This is the change between perfect rigid saw wave series versus the square series by default. And am I automating it, or did I just like, there it is, yeah. So if you want to automate this knob, you actually have to put it all the way up first. If you do this and then this, it's not going to go above the thing. That's because it's a unipolar knob as opposed to the filters and things which are bipolar that have a positive and negative like application to it. This one is just a positive one, which means you have to have it all the way up on positive. And then it means that the top end is square and the bottom end is saw, or rather the top end is this guy, the bottom end is this guy. And modulation wise, the denser harmonics sound better on the higher end of the modulation, and then the smoother harmonics sound better on the lower end, where you typically are darker and focusing more on bass. Oh yeah, and you might have been wondering why it still sounded square even though I put it back there, and that's because I'm automating this. This is the detune, which is another way to go from saw series to square series. The difference being this guy actually turns off harmonics. It turns them, they're not playing anymore, and this one moves them. It'll move them up to the position that is multiplied into the square position, which means that if you set changes to things that happen to particular harmonics, those harmonics are still there, and they're still doing it, just in a multiplied position. That's being automated by this, and I did that by copying that value out of there. Because this guy is like hard to see and automate, so you just kind of copy value from that. Where is it? There it is. Boop. And then paste it as an automation clip, and then also pasted one that was just off. So here's low 2, and here's that guy. And then I just like kind of put him in there when I feel like it. It's almost like I'm sequencing in the not sequencer. Woo. Yes. Okay. What else am I doing here? I carved the hell out of the global EQ at some point. Local EQ is pretty cut up too. Mentioned the phases. Volume's got its the whole top half, bottom half thing going on. Talked about that. Talked about that. Talked about that. And that. And that. Cool. So that's this half. This half and this half together. That sounds pretty light, but remember we're missing this guy. He's going to the distortion right now, but let's put him back in the distortion too. So now let's talk about a fun consequence of using the mod X speed mapping. Here it is, the control of modulation X. And what I mean by like the fun little bit here is that if I change the slope of a thing here, it doesn't just change how the automation is going to play out. It also changes how the parameter is going to end. Like that, for example, if I change it to this. Like, even though like this, it gets up here, like it's different at the end there. Even though like these guys aren't changing, it's still doing this. So why is the texture different? And that's because it's reading a different speed and giving a different value. This is a lot faster, up going anyway, than this, or maybe it's a lot slower by the time it calculates it in a different note. Point being is that it doesn't just change a parameter or the rhythm to move around the X parameter. It also changes the overall tone and character of the sound just for the fact that you're automating with a different shape. That's why we got lots of like different little doodads and like sharp dudes and stuff. That's this sound. I'm going to put out this whole FLP just so you can just dick around with this loop if you want. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.